Hello, friends, and welcome back to episode 7 of Dare Me to Prosper. I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited about today's episode. We're going to talk about spiritual gifts. So, what some of the common gifts are, how do you know if you have them, how can you develop them if you are aware that you have them, and so on and so forth. I just think this is such a fascinating topic, and I think it's something that a lot of people are just really starting to wake up to in the past year or two. And so it's just a good time to talk about it because it is very relevant for me, and I have a feeling it's relevant for a lot of you as well. I predict, not that I have the gift of being psychic, but I predict that spiritual gifts and things like these really, what now seems like really crazy spiritual gifts, like having psychic vision or like telepathy or like astral travel or all of these things, I think a lot of these gifts will be things that we really start to see come out more and more and start to see people using their gifts to help and serve other people in the future, especially things like healing and connecting people with loved ones and things like that. I predict that we're going to see an explosion of spiritual entrepreneurs, of people who are using their gifts in all sorts of ways to really serve other people, which I think is beautiful and amazing, and I'm really excited for it. So, without further ado, let's talk about it. So a spiritual gift is really just something, a spiritual talent or skill that you have been gifted with. Now, mind you, it doesn't have to be something that you necessarily are aware of since birth. You know how there's some people that they'll say, since I was a child, I could see spirits, or since I was a child, I could hear or communicate with beings or, spirits on the other side, what have you. It doesn't have to be that way. There are so many people that kind of wake up to these gifts, or they start to tap into it, or just weird things start happening when they are well into adulthood. And so even if you don't think you have a gift now, say in a year or two, you could really start to recognize, like, hey, there's some funny stuff happening, or I'm picking up on these little signals, or these little, I keep having these little visions, and you could wake up to gifts or talents, skills that you don't even realize you have. So it's not necessarily from birth. And I also think that, say there's a gift that maybe you don't have naturally like somebody else has from childhood, it doesn't mean that you cannot practice those things or do those things. I truly believe that each of us can do whatever we want to do or practice whatever we want to practice in terms of these gifts. I think everybody, for example, can kind of reflect inside or tap into like the gift of a psychic prediction, using your intuition, trying to tap in, trying to communicate with your higher self or what have you. I think everybody has that ability, but it's just a matter of, is it developed? Is it not developed? And how you go about practicing or tapping into that or taking it seriously. So that being said, I think there's also things that some people are more drawn towards this thing and some people are more drawn towards that thing. So, it's really just this beautiful kind of example of how everybody's a little bit different, and we can all practice and develop different gifts and then use those gifts to help each other, help other people who are not tapping into those gifts or who don't naturally have those things. So I think it's just a really amazing picture of how we can all serve each other. I truly believe everybody has at least one or two gifts that you are especially tuned into, even if you haven't really tapped into it yet. I think everybody just has natural things, just like everybody has natural skills and talents that are just random. Like some people are just naturally great dancers or great singers or great, whatever, great writer. Everybody has these different talents that, maybe they just didn't have to try that hard to be good at. And everybody's got something. Don't say you don't have one. Everybody has something, even if you're not aware of what it is. And I think spiritual gifts are the same way, that you, even if it's not the gift that you choose to tap into, I think everybody has one or two that they are more naturally inclined to be good at. So this may be a bit of a longer episode because I really want to go over a lot of these gifts and, what they are and how you can recognize them, because I think it's really important, because you might hear you might not think you have a gift, and then as I go over them, or as I go over how to recognize them, you may go, oh, wait a minute. I do that, or maybe I do have this gift. So I don't want to just gloss over these, because I think that's going to be really important. Utilizing the spiritual gifts that you have is a really important part of your spiritual development and just your getting to know yourself, developing your authentic and true self. Spiritual gifts, I believe, are a big part of that. I think they help you really discover and connect with who you really are, what your purpose is. They help you develop your intuition. It helps you initiate your own healing, and therefore a lot of times healing other people as well, because anytime you have been through something that was difficult and required you to heal, you are then equipped to help other people who may be in those shoes after you. I think it helps us really connect with God or the universe and deepen that connection. I think our gifts help us really just build a sense of compassion and service for others, because all of these gifts, no matter what it is, can also be used to serve other people. And I think that is genuinely a part of why we are gifted them, like I said. And I think it just helps you. I think it helps you uncover your overall purpose and your life path. So it's really important. And I think there's a lot of people that probably dismiss or think that they don't have gifts that they actually do have. And so we're going to talk about that. Okay, so how do you recognize what spiritual gifts you may have? And I'm going to go over details of each one, but just as an overview, signs that you may have a spiritual gift naturally, not that you can't develop it even if you don't, but feeling drawn to a certain practice. Like if there is a certain practice of some sort that really just piques your interest over everything else, whether that is tarot, whether that is like Reiki or energy work, whether that is like mediumship, like connecting with spirits on the other side, maybe it's animal communication. I mean, there are so many just crazy, insane things that people have natural abilities to do, and that people are then learning that they can develop. So if you feel drawn to something, that may indicate that it's something that comes more naturally to you. Also, unexplained intuitive experiences. The amount of times that I have conversations with people, even people in my own family, and they'll tell me something and I'm like, I've never heard that story before. Literally the other day, my mom was telling me, oh yeah, your brother has these visions all the time. I was like, what? Why has he never told me this? And so just people, I think, a lot of times, especially people that maybe aren't as tuned into the spiritual world in general, or maybe don't consider themselves to be like really on this spiritual journey, maybe they just haven't paid that much attention to it. I really think a lot of people have experiences like this, like things like gut feelings or vivid dreams or visions or weird, just like funny experiences. Maybe they had a psychic dream. Maybe they had a weird vision. Maybe they felt like they got a really strong message from a loved one who had passed on. All of these are spiritual experiences that indicate that you have an ability of some sort, because otherwise you wouldn't have been able to even receive that information or have that experience. Just even having heightened sensitivity to the emotions and energies around you. Empaths. This is a big one. A lot of people would not consider being an empath a gift. In fact, I would consider myself an empath, and I would almost say it's more of a curse than anything. But just being super, super sensitive to energies around you, to mood shifting, to, for lack of a better term, vibes in a room, or in a situation. That is a skill, because not everybody has that. Having a strong connection to the natural world or the spiritual realm, just being aware, having an interest, being open-minded. A lot of people who have just always kind of been open-minded to the other world or just mythical things. If you're somebody that's always been open-minded to the idea of something like mermaids or dragons, versus somebody that has always been like, yeah, there's no way that's ever been real in any spiritual realm, in any shape or capacity. That stuff's all mythical. People that are just more closed-minded, or maybe they're just simply only logical thinkers, those people, it's much harder to develop a spiritual gift, because they're just so tuned into the human, to the 3D, and closed-minded to this whole other world of possibility, where open-minded people, I think, just have an easier time being like, yeah, that's a possibility. Like, let's tap in, let's see what's there, let's figure it out. So people who just have a strong connection in general to nature, to the earth, or to spiritual realms and those ideas are more likely, or basically that is a good sign that you have some spiritual gifts, that you lean that way. Your natural inclinations basically are a big indicator. Okay, so let's go over a list of this is not an exclusive list, but just some of the most commonly recognized spiritual gifts, the most common, the ones you see coming up the most. And a lot of these will overlap. So a lot of these abilities may be slightly different, but similar. And so they have a lot of the same capabilities and things like that. You might recognize them in the same way. So there's a lot of overlap here, but I'm just going to go over some of the main gifts that you may recognize. So the first one being a very obvious, but psychic abilities. So the capacity to sense or perceive information beyond your normal 5 senses. And this can come in many ways, and you may recognize the terms clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, the clairs as they're often called, but it's basically the way that you pick up psychic information. So clairvoyance is a type of psychic ability that includes seeing visions or images beyond ordinary perception. Now, this could look like with your actual eyeballs, like you are people who can see, say, ghosts or spirits, or it can be kind of in your third eye, in your mind, where you have a vivid image or a symbol or a mental picture pop into your mind, say when somebody asks for advice, or maybe it's just random. Maybe you just see symbols that give you clues to situations and you're like, that's so funny. How did that pop into my mind? So say if you're doing a meditation and you get a symbol that offers you some sort of guidance, like seeing a bird that represents something to you, or seeing an open door during a meditation, or just during your day. If you notice recurring visual signs, like specific number sequences that seem to carry a message, or a big one, and it's funny, I just saw a video about this yesterday and I already had this written out on my outline, but seeing faces when your eyes are closed. So this happens to me a lot. So this is definitely one of those things that I feel like I naturally tap into is clairvoyance. But if you close your eyes and you see the outline of a face, for a long time, I thought this was just my mind kind of playing tricks on me, but turns out this is really common in people who have the gift of clairvoyance. So if you close your eyes and you see multiple faces, or you see a face and it's just like an outline of a face, that you can kind of see when you close your eyes, gift of clairvoyance. So those are a lot of the common kind of, flags that may pop up if you have clairvoyance. Clairaudience. So clairaudience is a psychic ability where you can receive information via sound, hearing sounds, hearing voices, or messages from the spiritual realm, the other side. This could look like hearing a soft voice or a thought, say something like, you should call this person, or you should take a different route home, and then you find out later, like, oh, wow, there was an accident over here, or an accident happened. That was amazing. How did I know to go intuitively? And to clarify, it doesn't have to be like specifically like now some people do, I think, hear actual sound that other people are not hearing. It can also just be, I think, I say like quote unquote hearing, like you're hearing it, you're recognizing that you don't feel like this information is directly coming from you, like it's a voice, and you might even hear it in your own voice in your mind, but you don't feel like it was coming from your brain. This was not a thought that you thought actively. Does that make sense? So this could look like picking up on subtle energetic sounds, like ringing in your ears, especially if you're in meditation, having a song pop into your head that you didn't hear recently, but a song pops into your head and it specifically relates to a situation or something that might be meaningful to your current situation. That is clairaudience. So again, that's something that happens to a lot of people, and you may have not thought of it as a psychic gift, but in fact, if you are getting communication through music or sound or messages like that, that would fall under clairaudience. So clairsentience, this is basically like being an empath. Clairsentience is feeling emotions or the physical sensations of others. So being able to pick up on a shift in energy, like say somebody in the room is maybe angry, but they're not giving any clues visually. So it's not that you saw their face and realized they were angry. It's not that they were acting upset. They're not giving any clues, and you just know. You just have a feeling. You can feel what they are feeling. Or maybe, it can be that somebody is giving clues, but somebody else is mad and you feel it. You feel it just like they feel it, even though it's not your anger. And you can do this without knowing it. Like a lot of times you'll hear people talk about how empaths pick up on other people's feelings, and so they begin feeling anger or sadness that isn't theirs. So you're picking up on other people's emotions just from being around people or from being in a crowded, populated place. And you're picking up all these emotions and carrying them around with you like they are yours, but they're not. And so empaths have to be very careful and protection and cutting cords and things like that. But clairsentience is essentially that idea of feeling emotions or physical sensations. So feeling like it could go beyond just being an empath, like say your hand is really hurting and you can't figure out why your hand is in so much pain, and then you figure out like a family member broke their wrist or something like that, that you're getting some sort of psychic intuition or communication through your own body. I would say twins also a lot of these are honestly probably common with twins, but that's another one that I think twins see a lot. Okay, claircognizance. So like cognitive, this is knowing things without conscious reasoning. So claircognizance may look like instantly knowing the solution to a problem without logical reasoning, sensing somebody's true intentions. See that there's overlap there with, I would say, clairsentience. So these can get a little blurred lines, but even when their words suggest otherwise, knowing somebody's true intentions, knowing something that will happen before it does, like you just have a gut feeling about something, even though you don't necessarily have a logical reason to. That would be claircognizance. Knowing that something's going to happen before it does, like a feeling that somebody will call or an event will go a certain way. So especially if that happens often, that is a sign that you may have claircognizance. Okay, so those are the main clairs that all fall under psychic ability. Similar to psychic ability, but sort of in its own category, would be mediumship, which is the ability to communicate with spirits or entities from the afterlife, often through messages or guidance. This is something that, again, many people don't think of themselves as a psychic medium, compared to people who say have been doing this since childhood and they're just have a really open communication with the other side, and they, will communicate or tell people messages that, past loved ones are saying. However, the amount of people, again, these conversations I've had with my own family and myself, where say I've gotten a dream or something about, like I was just thinking about my grandfather and this situation and, that happened. And then I have a dream about him finding me in a crowd, like things like that. I would say that is kind of a sign that you are tapping into some mediumship abilities. So, if you just instantly get a message that you feel like is from a loved one, or you're getting signs and symbols and cardinals, all of those things would fall under mediumship. So it could also look like just feeling the presence of a loved one who's passed away, receiving comforting or meaningful thoughts from them, seeing or sensing spirits around certain places or objects, experiencing vivid dreams where spirits share messages or guidance. I think a lot of people have experienced this. This is mediumship. You don't have to be like hearing audible messages in your ear in full, complete sentences to be considered using the gift of mediumship. Again, so many people have this. I had a dream years ago when I was in high school, and I was on a trip to Florida with a friend of mine in high school. Like I was away from home. And overnight I had a dream. No, it wasn't a dream. Sorry. At night, my friend had fallen asleep and we were in this Airbnb or whatever. And I just remember laying awake being like, I feel like I'm not alone. Like I just feel this room almost feels like haunted. I can't figure it out. I had never had that feeling before. I couldn't figure out what it was. But I just was like, I just feel like I'm not alone. I feel like somebody is watching me. And I wasn't necessarily like terrified. Like I went to sleep okay after that, but I just felt like, why do I feel like I'm not alone? And I couldn't figure it out. I went to sleep. The next day, my friend's mom told me, hey, Avery, your family called and your grandfather had passed away. And I just remember knowing instantly that was my grandfather. Like that was my grandfather that night. And, that was my dad's dad. And he's had messages again where he's just like walking, by the lake, and all of a sudden he gets a message. Like this happens all the time. Almost every person in my family, I can name a story or a situation where they've had an experience like this. And so it's very likely that you, if you were listening to this, have had something similar. And I can talk more about my personal experiences in a minute, but those are all examples of mediumship. Okay, healing. So healing, a lot of people think just physical healing, but there's a lot of things that can fall under the category of healing. So healing is just the ability to channel positive energy to heal, whether it's physical, emotional, or spiritual ailments. So this would include energy healing, things like Reiki, using the energy field around you to promote healing. This would include also just people being very high frequency, very high energy individuals. Those types of people are natural healers because they can just be around people and have a positive impact on the people around them just by being in the room. So having a relationship with people that are very high frequency, or just these people. I remember my mom telling me a story about this woman who could see auras, who could see people's auras, and everywhere she went, she could see if people were really struggling with something and they had this dark cloud around them, or people who had these rainbow auras that everywhere they went. She said she watched this woman who had this rainbow aura around her, and everywhere she went, she would just like leave almost like these clouds of positive energy. And so again, I haven't even gotten to that one yet, but seeing auras is also a spiritual gift. But so energy healing, psychic healing, so just knowing of other people's ailments, being able to just either cognitively know or to see physical ailments in other people. Like the medical medium, Anthony Williams, whether you follow him or not, doesn't matter, but somebody like that, that is the ability to have a psychic healing, a psychic knowing of other people's ailments. There's hands-on healing where you're physically touching people to transfer positive energy and heal them. Usually it could be physically, but it can also be emotionally, using your hands and your energy to facilitate emotional or physical healing in somebody else. Healing through relationships. Again, people who are just high energy tend to do this, I would say high frequency, but also healing through relationships, meaning maybe you're just somebody who naturally tends to counsel other people, or who naturally tends to just show up and you don't have to be an empath to do this, but to show up for other people, to be there for other people. Maybe you're somebody that other people frequently rely on because you just have a lot of love to give and things like that. Just those types of people, that is a healer. That is a healer who is healing people through being there for them and healing them with words and things like that, support, comfort. Sound healing, so using sound frequencies, using music, bowls, singing bowls, and things like that. Sound healing is something, actually really interestingly, there's been new technology come out lately that's just now kind of coming on the scene. It's obviously not being used mainstream yet, but sound healing, I think, is going to be something we start to see in actually the medical field come out as maybe what will first be a type of alternative healing, but I think we will eventually see it become more mainstream, sound healing and frequency healing. Okay, so those are a lot of different types of the healing ability or gift. And you may have some of these naturally if, like, let's say people feel comforted or physically better after being around you, or you touching them or hugging them. If people are naturally just attracted to you, if people tend to flock to you and tell you things or spill to you or whatever, that could be a sign that you are a healer. If you are naturally drawn to healing practices like Reiki, like sound therapy, massage, even herbal remedies, which, that would fall under that too. You're naturally drawn to those practices. Again, you may have the gift of healing. If you intuitively know how to offer advice or guidance that helps somebody to heal emotionally, if you feel the need to counsel people, just out of love, that can be a gift of healing. I almost consider this podcast a type of healing where I just feel like we're bonding and connecting over just this idea of positivity and personal growth and healing and all of these things. So healing can look like so many different things, but those are some ways that you might recognize that you possibly have the gift of healing. The next one would be seership, which I really had never heard the word seership before. It's usually just referred to of being a seer. You may have heard of a seer. I think seers are even mentioned in the Bible. But this would be the ability to see the future or distant events through visions, dreams, or deep intuitive insight. So this could look like having prophetic dreams. This could look like having an uncanny ability to read the room or sense an undercurrent of events before they unfold. Again, there's some overlap there, obviously, with gifts we've already mentioned. This is often paired with a strong sense of clarity or foresight. If you repeatedly notice symbols, numbers, or synchronicities that point to an upcoming event, like you're constantly just feeling like you're tapping into the future, having a sudden intuitive unshakable feeling about something that later happens, these would all point to this gift of seership. Funny enough, my sister was told, I'll check with her before I post this and ask if I can share this. But she was told years ago by an energy reader that she had the gift of seership. And then it didn't really come up again. I don't think she really mentioned it until earlier this year. She started having these really intense visions while she was awake. And it just kind of, from what I understand, it just kind of came out of nowhere. Like, I don't think this is something that has really happened to her before, or if it has, she hasn't mentioned it. But she was having these really intense, very crazy symbolic visions that then she was like trying to interpret. And they were very much, she felt, about the future and things that would unfold in the future. So this is wild. And honestly, if I, didn't hear her tell me that, I wouldn't have really even understood, I think, this gift quite as much. But so if that has happened to you, if you've had visions, whether they're in your dreams or when you're awake, that's definitely a sign of seership. Okay, the next one, channeling. So channeling is the gift of communicating messages from spirits, angels, and other non-physical entities through a person's voice, writing, or energy. So most people are familiar with channeling, but there's different types of channeling. There's trans channeling or trans mediumship, which I can talk about in a second, or there's channeling where you receive a message, say through claircognizance or clairsentience or whatever, and then you communicate that message to others. That is considered channeling. You can channel through being a medium, like we talked about before, where you receive messages from the other side, and then that's technically channeling because you're taking the message and then giving it to somebody else. Animal communication, this is something that I really had never even thought about until I started seeing videos pop up on things like social media, but there's definitely people that have the gift of animal communication where they can hear and speak to animals and then communicate that to their owners, which seems like an amazing gift to give for the relationship between like somebody and their pets, for example. Elementals. Now, this might be a stretch for people who are not here yet, but just this idea of communicating with the elements, with Earth, like with Earth, literally the planet herself, or with wind, water, fire, earth, or say elementals, things like fairies and gnomes. Now, that's not for everybody, and that's totally fine. And some people are like, you're nuts. But to me, I don't really see it any differently than, say, aliens. Like 20 years ago, so many people would have said aliens aren't real. They don't exist. Now look at us, right? Like, I never say never is my thought process. I'm very open to new ideas, and I try to have discernment. I know there's a lot of people out there that use AI and try to trick you into believing all of that you're seeing things that you're not really seeing. That being said, I'm just open-minded. So, but yes, there are people that claim to communicate with elemental beings like fairies or Bigfoot or gnomes and things like that. But also just you can tap into, I think, the energy of certain things, even if they aren't necessarily conscious in the way that you would think of something conscious, like the wind or fire, or I think you can tap into the energy of almost anything because everything has energy. So anyway, that might be a stretch for some people, but I'm mentioning it. And then, broader channeling with other beings like angels, aliens, what have you, conscious beings that are not on Earth, where people channel, receive information, and then give the information to whoever. So again, if you have this gift, it might just be that you are really interested in it. Like any of these gifts, if you're drawn to it, it may be something that comes easier to you. This could also look like receiving downloads where you just instantly get information that you weren't looking for, you weren't even thinking about it, and then all of a sudden you just have information. That is channeling. Feeling like your words are being given to you rather than thought yourself, having a sudden shift in your energy, or feeling like you are connected with another energy that is not yours, channeling. Feeling like you can read people or animals, whether it's their thoughts or whether it's just kind of an intuitive knowing of their intentions, channeling. So again, I think this is something that a lot of people actually do without realizing what they're even doing. Even people who maybe are not spiritual at all and are not open-minded to any of this, I think naturally do a lot of these things, and they just don't like to call it spiritual, like maybe they're more religious, or they just don't really think about it and they don't really tap into it. So again, I think a lot of people are channeling without even recognizing it. Okay, and then trance channeling, which is a type of channeling, but that would be when somebody allows another energy into their actual physical body to use their body to communicate messages. So that would be like Abraham Hicks, Bashar, anybody that takes messages right into their physical body and then speaks them. And a lot of people are still really skeptical of those people, and I completely understand why. Honestly, I think there's no more reason to be I don't think there's any reason to be more skeptical of a trance channeler than a channeler. If anything, I feel like it takes more I feel like it's harder to fake being a trance channel than it is to just channel things where you're just saying, oh, I received this message from God, whatever. People tend to believe that to me is easier to fake than a trance channel who, they allow a spirit in and it takes over their whole, maybe their accent changes or the tone of their voice changes, the way that they speak changes. And people are often very skeptical of that. From my view, it's much harder to fake that. Like if I were going to give fake messages and going to try to trick people and give out, prophetic messages that I wasn't actually receiving, I would go for the regular channeling message of, hey, I just got this message and this is what God told me, versus trying to fake a trance channel. So that's just my opinion. It doesn't mean that I'm just taking in everything that every trance channel says as absolute fact, but just in general, I tend to think it takes a lot of guts to do this, and I'm going to hear what they have to say. Again, I'm a very open-minded person, and then I tend to just take it all in and then use my discernment to kind of decide what's going to stick with me. But just fruit for thought. So anyway, yes, a trance channel, somebody who allows their body to be used or taken over by another energy to convey messages. Okay, and then telepathy. This one's really interesting. Obviously, telepathy is something that you've probably are already aware of, but the ability to send or receive thoughts, emotions, or images from one person to another without using physical communication, without verbally speaking, you're just able to telepathically communicate thoughts to another person. This may look like thinking about someone and having them call or text you moments later. That's a very common thing that happens often. That would be a form of telepathy. Feeling someone's thoughts or emotions without them saying anything. Again, a lot of overlap with other gifts. Complimenting someone's sentence or knowing what they're about to say before it leaves their mouth. That would also be telepathy. So telepathy, again, I think is something we tend to think of as it's not telepathy unless I hear exactly what they're saying word by word, sentence by sentence, and I hear it audibly in my head. That's telepathy. Yeah, it is, but also just receiving intentions from somebody. Again, I think twins do this. So I think this is already something that we see happening. It's just that some of us are more tapped into it than others. Many of you have probably heard of the podcast as well, the telepathy tapes, which have really blown up recently. I've listened to them. I think it's fascinating. It's a podcast. If you haven't listened to it, you should absolutely go listen to it. It's a podcast about nonverbal autistic. Most of them are children or young adults who they have discovered many have the ability to telepathically communicate, often to people they're closest to, so a parent or a teacher or somebody like that, and that not only that, but they were telepathically communicating with other non-speaking autistic people all together in groups. So it's fascinating, and they do all these tests and things like that to test if it's actually happening. Definitely go listen to it. But that would be telepathy. Okay, a couple more, and then we'll talk about like how to develop them. But astral traveling and remote viewing. This is really cool. Remote viewing or traveling outside of the body. This would be usually going into a meditative state and then basically having your consciousness be able to move around outside of your body and be able to visualize and see where you are, and it's not the same place as your physical body. So people usually would get into a deep meditative state and do this. People who have had out-of-body experiences, this is technically astral traveling or remote viewing. People who have had near-death experiences will often talk about how just after death they recognize that they were leaving their body and how they could see the hospital room and they could hear the doctors around them. I've had personal family members that have had near-death experiences with this exact scenario where they leave their body and they can see the things around them. That's astral traveling. That's remote viewing, but you don't have to have a near-death experience to do that. You can definitely practice that. And a lot of times people will astral travel and view other places or times on Earth. People visit the Akashic records. People go back and view world events, situations that happened, just gathering all sorts of outside information. This could look also like you may, basically, the clues that you may be able to tap into this gift more easily would be having vivid or lucid dreams often, especially dreams of flying or visiting places that feel very real. Having an out-of-body experience, again, doesn't have to be a near-death experience, just an out-of-body experience may indicate you may have this gift. Sleep paralysis, which is terrifying, but again, so sorry if you struggle with that, but that would be a sign that you may have the gift of astral traveling or remote viewing. And then having a feeling of a split consciousness or having a feeling of being in two places at once. Again, whether that's in like a meditative state or a dream state, but just feeling like you're in two places at once, which I've heard a lot of people talk about. Astral traveling or remote viewing may be a gift that you can tap into easily. Okay, divination abilities. Basically the ability to gain insight into future events or hidden information through tools or various methods like tarot reading, runes, astrology, using a pendulum, crystal gazing, like you've seen people who basically use like looking at something reflective to gain information, numerology. It's basically any kind of tool that can help you recognize symbols that help you predict things. So again, very common. And I think this is also a good, maybe almost like introductory step to just psychic abilities in general. Like you can start out using tools to help you recognize symbols, to tap into psychic abilities or channeling abilities, and then later you may discover you don't even need the tools and that you've practiced and you've gotten better at just receiving those messages just straight to you. So again, every single gift is like, it's like a sport or anything. There's some people that are naturally really gifted and they don't have to work as hard. But if you just really want to be good at a sport, anybody can start a sport at any age and practice and practice and practice and become good at it. Your gifts are the same way. You might be more naturally talented in some areas, but you can develop or practice any gift you want. And just the more that you practice it, the more you develop it, the better you'll get at it. You know, speaking a language the same way. It just takes a lot of practice and immersing yourself in that practice, and you will become better at it. So anyway, if you have this natural gift of divination, it may feel like feeling drawn to use tarot cards or pendulums or runes, things like that. Receiving meaningful patterns often or messages through things like scrying, so like writing, what do they call it? Automatic writing, astrology, interpreting symbols. Again, lots of overlap here with a lot of these. Aura reading we talked about, but being able to see people's auras, being able to sense the energy around their body, using context clues, things like that. And prophecy, which again, there's so much overlap, but we've talked about this. So that's basically the most common spiritual gifts. Certainly not an exhaustive list, but hopefully that gives you an idea. I'm willing to bet that there's at least one of those where you were like, wait a minute, that's happened to me. Maybe I do have this gift I wasn't aware of, because I feel like so many of us do that. So just to clue you in, some of the things that I would say fall under my personal spiritual gifts and I think are very, very common and that I did not recognize until I was well into adulthood are, one, I was told by actually this same energy reader that told my sister she was a seer. And also, I haven't talked to this lady in years, you guys, and she texted me the other day and I was like, what is happening? There's so many synchronicities happening lately. But again, I have not seen this energy reader in years, and she just randomly texted me the other day. So I'm taking that as some kind of sign. I don't know what kind of sign it is, but it's some kind of sign. But this woman told me in a session years ago that I was a healer. And not only that, but I have 3 children. She said, all of your children are healers. She said, you're a healer and all 3 of your children are healers. So she basically told me, she was also a Reiki practitioner. She told me, so you could naturally really be good at something like Reiki, but she said, but you don't have to. It doesn't have to be Reiki. You just, in general, you have a healing energy about you. So I thought that was really very fascinating. I tend to interpret that now as my voice. I'm a Gemini. I'm a big communicator. I tend to recognize my healing practice as something that I typically do through my voice and through speech. Hence this podcast. But even off of the podcast, I tend to be somebody that really, I verbalize my emotions. I talk through things with other people. That is something that I just naturally lean towards and like to do. I tend to think that that may be a way that I can help others is through just conversation and communication. Another thing that I have just developed in not until adulthood though is claircognizance and clairaudience. I tend to do a lot of communication with like my spirit guides or my higher self through claircognizance and clairaudience. I receive a lot of symbolism or just messages. Now, usually it takes a little bit of effort, like it's something that I have to intentionally ask for, I have to tap in, but I have had so many situations where I've gotten messages that have been later verified to be true, or I'll just get really random downloads. Something that's been happening to me over the last couple of years is I will randomly remember dreams that I had years ago and totally forgot about, or I will randomly remember, due to trauma, I've actually forgotten a lot of my childhood, and I think that's, again, not super uncommon. I don't remember most of my childhood. I remember little bits and pieces, and then I have a better memory starting around 6th grade because that's when things shifted in my life. But I will remember in the last couple of years, I'll have memories pop up, just random memories from my childhood that I had completely blocked out or forgotten. And they'll just kind of pop into my mind when I'll be putting a kid to bed, and then randomly I will get a memory from when I was like 4. And I'm like, where did that come from? I wasn't thinking about it. So things like that. I get songs a lot. So again, I think this is very common. I get songs where a song will pop into my head that I didn't hear, I haven't been thinking of, maybe a song I haven't heard in years, but it specifically pertains to something that I might be going through or something that I was just talking about. That is clairaudience and something that happens to me quite a bit. Things like mediumship. So for me, being able to kind of tap into the other side in the past year or so, this is kind of a freaky one, but it really hasn't been. It has not been scary for me. And that's how I know, one, that I feel like the spirits that I may be interacting with are safe, but two, that this is a gift that maybe I am developing, is this ability. I've been seeing spirits, is what I assume it is. I'll sit in my living room at night. This started a couple years ago where I would be sitting in my living room at night and staring at the TV, and our TV is in between 2 built-in bookcases, and I would start seeing these little wisps of movement, specifically on one particular side of the TV in one area in front of the bookcase. And I would just see these little wisps of movement, and I would look over and there's nothing there. And at first I thought, oh, maybe it's a bug, maybe it's, I don't know. But it was happening every single night that I sat down to watch TV, and always in the same spot. And it was only that time of night, only when I sat down, only in that same spot. And no, it's not like TV glare or anything else, because I watched TV for years just fine in this exact same spot with no issue. But it's usually when I'm alone and it's quiet in the house, and I'll see these little wisps. Well, over the months and then the last year, it would grow and it would get bigger to the point where I was starting to see very large, I don't know how to describe it because I'm not seeing color or light, but I would say it's like a translucent just blur of movement in front of this bookcase. And for a long time, I just tried to ignore it, but then it would start to move. So it started to grow. So it would be a much larger movement. And then it would kind of move where maybe instead of behind the bookshelf, then I would start to see it kind of behind the couch that I was sitting on, or a little bit closer to me, kind of on the other side of the bookcase. And eventually I was like, this is definitely some sort of spirit or something. But the odd part was I tend to be a pretty spooked person. And I didn't usually, there's been a couple of times when I felt a little nervous, but usually I do not feel scared by this. And that's kind of why I felt like if I don't feel scared by this, and I tend to be a pretty intuitive person and also an easily spooked person, to me that communicated, I feel like if this is a spirit, it's safe, and it's possibly somebody that I know. Maybe this is a loved one or something, which the only people that I've been very blessed in my life. The only people that I have lost have been my grandparents at a ripe old age. But what I started to think about later, once it had been a long time of me seeing the spirit, was that my grandfather was a very, very accomplished person. He was a history professor at Duke University and taught. I think he was the longest teaching professor to this day. And he wrote a lot of books. He was a general in the army, and so he wrote a lot of books concerning history and military weapons and things like that. And I have some of his books on that bookshelf right, behind where I was seeing this. And so one day I started to think, I have these items, because a lot of times spirits are tied to specific items that maybe belong to that person or something, because there's just a lot of energy there in those items from that person. And I started to think one night, I wonder if this is tied to my grandfather, because his books are right there on the shelf. And I don't know, it just popped into my mind. I just had that thought one night. That night, or maybe it was the night after, but right around the time that I just instantly had that recognition, I had a dream that I was searching for somebody in a crowd, and I came upon this old man, and he had white hair just like my grandfather did, and I came around his front. Oddly though, he didn't really look like my grandfather in the dream. He was this old man, but he looked slightly different. He not like a younger version of himself. He just looked a little bit different. I'm not sure why. But I went up to him and I was like, "Is it you? Who are you?" In the dream I was almost like, "I know you. Who are you?" And then I said, "Oh, his name was Holly, grandfather." So I called him Granddaddy Holly. And I said, "Granddaddy Holly, is it you?" And instantly in the dream, he's like, "Oh, there you are. I was looking for you. There you are. Da, 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 da." And that was the dream. And we embraced, and it was so interesting. I usually don't remember my dreams. I don't tend to like dreams. I find a lot of my dreams to be scary, and I don't really like them. So I don't remember all of them. But I had that dream, and I woke up and I remember thinking, was that my grandfather's way of communicating to me, yes, it's me. Yes, it's me. That's the spirit. I don't know if it was because I thought that I had the dream, or if it's vice versa. But intuitively, I still pick up on, I think that's what it is. I think I'm seeing my grandfather or another relative possibly, but I feel very safe with that spirit. So anyways, that was a really long-winded story of me basically saying sometimes these gifts pop up later, and something you maybe have never been able to do, like see spirits, all of a sudden you can do. And by the way, since then, I now see that same spirit, that same movement. I see it in my bedroom at night. I don't know. I have yet to see a person, but I definitely see this big, just wisp of movement is all I know how to describe it as. So, okay, let's move on. Let's talk about really quickly, if you recognize any of these gifts, how you might go about developing gifts that you think you have or that you just want to develop. The first thing that I would recommend is definitely meditation, because meditation, and no matter what gift it is, can help you tap into it and develop it, because you're tapping inside. You're going in. You are recognizing your own spirit, your own soul, your own higher self, or what have you. Just stilling the world around you and going inside is going to help you develop your inner knowing in general, your intuition, your inner knowing, because you're going from outward to inward. Clearing the mind and increasing your intuition will help any gift that you are trying to develop. And then just practicing, obviously, whatever gift it is, attempting to practice it. So that could even look like journaling your experiences, just thinking about your experiences, talking about things that are going on. If you feel like you have intuitive abilities or psychic abilities, maybe you start trying to tap into your friends' situations with their permission, of course, but or somebody that's close to you, trying to tap into, say, their mind, which also, that's a little bit of telepathy, just trying to tap into situations that are around you. You can also do that through meditation. Maybe it's practicing giving tarot readings if that's something that you feel drawn to. Maybe it's practicing astral travel, which would require, just laying down, getting into a meditative state. And I have heard people that do this say it takes a long time. And unless it's something that, again, for some people, it just pops up in childhood and it just happens naturally for them. But for a lot of people, maybe you suppressed it during childhood, or maybe you're just developing it now. And so it takes practice. Something like astral travel, you need to assume that it's going to take weeks, months, or even years to truly develop a skill like this, just like you would say learning a language or getting really good at a sport and things like that. It doesn't don't practice for a week and think that if you're not an expert at it that you don't have that gift. These things take time. Something else that is super, super important with every single gift is trusting your intuition. We live in a world, and many of us have grown up in a world where we are taught not to trust our intuition, or that intuition in general is phony, and that we need to be really logical and trust the science and only trust concrete things around you. Don't trust your inner gut or your inner feelings. That is BS, and we often have blocks that make it harder for us to trust our intuition or think that we're just making stuff up. You have to learn to trust messages that you get. Now, obviously, if you hear a voice that tells you to go jump off a bridge, let's not trust that. In general, trust emotions or feelings that are helping you, that feel safe. If you are having like scary, intrusive thoughts, that is not necessarily intuition. Oftentimes, many of us are picking up on either other people's opinions or feelings, or, just you may be tapping into a negative energy around you. Your intuition is not the same thing as your fear. Your fear, something that we have all developed over time from outside messages that tell us that we have things to be afraid of. So let's say this, for example, because I bet there's a lot of anxious listeners out there like me. For example, though, let's say you are getting a psychic message that tells you you need to avoid a certain route to take home. Intuition will just feel like, I just really feel like I need to take this way home. It just feels better. I'm going to go with my gut feeling and take this way home. Fear feels like, oh my God, something bad is going to happen. What do I do? I'm terrified. And that is not intuition. In fact, I would argue that's not intuition. Anything like if your guides or your higher self or God or the universe or whatever is trying to communicate a message to keep you safe or to keep others safe, it's never going to come through a message of fear. It will always come intuitively through a feeling of just needing to do something or needing to say something different, what have you. It's going to feel safe and it's going to feel like you can trust it. That is completely different than fear. Fear comes from basically that's your body's survival mechanism, but fear is usually more, I don't even want to say logical, because fear is not always logical, but it's more like your brain is trying to keep you safe, and it's coming from your ego. It's coming from your brain, which is responsible for processing threats and triggering your fight or flight. So that's literally your body trying to keep you safe. And a lot of times there is no real reason, right? We fear things all the time that we have no business fearing, that have no real basis, but we're just triggered. We're in our fight or flight. And so we're listening to these fear thoughts because we're afraid. Fear comes from our biology and, millions of years of humans trying to stay alive and run from things and stay away from things. But it's like a leftover mechanism that we can't always trust. Okay, so fear is not to be trusted. Intuition is to be trusted. Intuition, especially the more that you develop it, is coming from a deep place of wisdom, from your higher self, from your subconscious mind, your connection to God, to the universe. That is your intuition, and it will never make you feel terrified. Your intuition is there to communicate to you in a way that God would communicate to you, in a way that your angels or your guides or your higher self or your subconscious would communicate to you, which is not fearful. Intuition will be calm, will be steady, will be clear. Fear feels frazzled and panicky and often just grows bigger and bigger. That is how you can notice the difference between fear and intuition. So I feel like I just needed to make that little caveat because I know a lot of us struggle with that. But learning to trust your intuition means learning to trust the voice that is giving you calm, clear messages. And it's just more of a gut feeling. It's never a panicky, afraid feeling. So don't feel like if you're panicking and you're anxious about something that is intuition, because I have been there and I have done that, especially if you're a parent and you're worried about your kids or whatever. Your intuition is not going to feel panicky. So just know that. Intuition may have a feeling of urgency. I think that is possible, but it's not going to have a feeling of panic. Okay, so moving on, another way to just practice these gifts is to learn from teachers and mentors. You know, there's definitely people that are out there that have been practicing these gifts for years and years, or have had them since childhood, or that have just gone before us and been practicing and developing their gifts for years and can tell you more about how to develop them and what to look for. Having teachers and mentors, whether they're people that you know in person or just people you find on the internet, is an absolutely great tool that you should be using to develop your gifts. And beyond that, like I mentioned, just having patience with yourself. You're going to get it wrong. You're going to stumble and fall. Again, just like if you are learning any other skill, it takes time. It takes, there's a learning curve. It might feel frustrating at times, but you're going to get there if you just keep going, keep practicing, keep learning. You're going to have moments where you feel really frustrated, like, I'm not getting it. I'm never going to get it. Keep going. Keep going. You are going to get it. You do have natural abilities. You just have to practice them. And also, just naturally, as the planet kind of ascends into these higher frequencies, these higher energies, as you continue to develop as a person and move through higher frequencies and higher energies, those gifts will be even stronger and easier to tap into, which is exactly why so many people have kind of been coming online with their gifts now in 2024, 2025, much easier than they could, say, 10 years ago, because not only were they not as awakened and not as in high of a frequency, but the planet was also in a much denser frequency. And so all of these things are things that kind of open up and unlock as the energy overall does. Also, just to touch on protection, quick reminder, it is always a good idea anytime you are tapping in, whether it's a meditation or any kind of gift, it's always a good idea to ground yourself and to ask for protection or work on protecting yourself. Because not in a fear-based mindset, but it's the way that it's like you wear a seatbelt. You wear a seatbelt every single time you get in the car. You could go your whole life and never get in an accident, but you wear your seatbelt just in case you get in an accident, right? It's a just in case mechanism that you would never think to not do because it's a just in case. That way, if it happens, you have a means of protection. Protecting yourself in the spiritual realm in the same way. It's not because the second you close your eyes and go into a meditation, there's a bunch of evil spirits that are waiting to attack you. That's not the case. It's just that those things do exist and they're out there, and it's always a good idea to protect yourself just in case. So we don't do it out of fear. We do it because it's a good idea, and why not? It's a way of protecting yourself just in case you come across something that is not for your highest good, either by asking your guides and your angels for protection, envisioning a bubble of light around you. It kind of depends on the skill or the gift that you're tapping into and how you're doing it. There might be things that are better or worse to do. Whatever that looks like for you, asking for or setting up protection for yourself is always a must, just like you would never drive your car without a seatbelt on. Same thing. I think it's common also for people to kind of feel maybe afraid when they are, especially if you're really in the beginning stages of kind of your spiritual walk or development. It's common, I think, to be fearful about what you might encounter, what's this going to look like, or I don't know how to do this, or it's just fear of the unknown, really, is what it is. And I just want to say, don't be afraid. This is not a scary thing. It's just an unknown thing. It's like going to a new place for the first time. If you're kind of tapping into the spiritual realm for the first time, that feels really scary because it's so unknown, especially because you cannot see it with your physical eyes. So don't be afraid. You have to understand that it's just something new. The biggest thing, I think, is just to remember that you are learning to trust yourself. You are going to feel, especially if you are just beginning to tap into these things, like you are making things up. You're going to feel like you're making things up. You're going to feel like it's not true. It's just your own thoughts. Keep going, because yeah, could it be your own thoughts? Possibly, but a lot of things that I used to think were my own thoughts were in fact not. And were in fact messages that I was receiving that I was just writing off because it's a very subtle thing, I think, for a lot of people. Messages that you receive or communication or just tapping into anything, it's very subtle. And so it's really learning to decipher the differences in your own mind and inside of your body between what is you and what is not you, what is your body and what is like the spiritual side that you're tapping into. And I know that sounds really vague because it really just depends on what spiritual gift you are trying to develop. But just learning to trust yourself, that's something that's going to need to be a constant reminder. All right, this episode is ridiculously long. I really aim for most of my episodes to be 30 to 45 minutes. This is way longer. However, I really felt like it was important to go over each gift in depth so that you could recognize gifts that you may not know that you have. But I hope this was helpful for you. Again, you can always email me at daremetoprosper@gmail.com if you have a topic that you would like to cover or a guest that you would like to come on, or if you have a podcast, or if you have something, a message that you want to get out and you'd like to be a guest, I would love to hear from you. As always, please give the podcast a 5-star review. If you have enjoyed listening, it would mean a lot to me and it really, really helps the podcast. You truly have no idea. I'm so thankful for you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Trust your intuition, and I will see you next time on Dare Me to Prosper.